A girl went out for a walk and vanished without a trace. Decades later, builders made a shocking discovery hidden under the floor. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Millfield, 1978. An era when doors remained unlocked and children roamed freely through the tree-lined streets of this small community where everyone knew each other by name. For the Henderson family, life unfolded with the comforting predictability of the seasons. Robert left at 7:30 each morning for the local bank where he had worked as an accountant for 12 years. Margaret divided her time between teaching at the elementary school and tending to their home, and their 3 children, 10-year-old Jason, 5-year-old Lily, and 3-year-old Michael, grew up in the safety of the yellow 2-story house at 42 Elm Street. Lily Henderson stood out even in a town where all children were considered special. With blonde hair framing a face of rosy cheeks and crystalline blue eyes, the little girl possessed an insatiable curiosity about the natural world. Margaret frequently found the pockets of Lily's overalls filled with colorful stones, interesting leaves, and especially wildflowers, which the girl collected with the dedication of a young scientist. "She knows more flower names than most adults," Robert would proudly tell anyone who would listen during Sunday barbecues in the Hendersons' backyard, while Lily ran among the guests distributing daisies and dandelions gathered from the nearby field. Sunday, May 14, 1978, dawned as one of those perfect days that seemed to have stepped out of a postcard. Spring had arrived in full force, transforming the outskirts of Millfield into a multicolored carpet of wildflowers. At the local church, families gathered for the morning service, and the Hendersons took their usual place on the third pew to the right. Lily wore the yellow floral dress her grandmother had given her for her last birthday, matched with a ribbon of the same color in her hair, meticulously combed by Margaret. After the Sunday lunch, the roast that Robert prepared with care every other week, the routine continued as always. Jason went to his friend Billy's house to trade baseball cards, Robert settled into his armchair with the Sunday paper, and Margaret began dinner preparations while Michael took his afternoon nap. At 3:42, a time that would forever be etched in Margaret's memory, Lily appeared in the kitchen, her eyes shining with that particular intensity her mother knew well. "Mommy, can I go pick some flowers for the vase in the living room? The blue ones started blooming in Mr. Wilson's field." Margaret looked out the window. The sky was clear, with no sign of the rain the weatherman had predicted for late afternoon. The field Lily referred to was visible from the kitchen, a stretch of land belonging to their elderly neighbor, Mr. Wilson, separated from the Hendersons' property by a low white wooden fence. "All right, sweetheart, but listen carefully." Margaret knelt down, adjusting the ribbon in her daughter's hair. "Don't go beyond Mr. Wilson's fence, and come back before the sun starts to set. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Mommy," Lily replied, already running toward the back door. At the threshold, she briefly turned, displaying that smile that revealed her missing front tooth. "I'll bring back the prettiest flowers I can find." That was the last time Margaret saw her daughter. At 4:30, Margaret raised her eyes from the pie crust she was preparing, noticing that the sky had begun to change, dark clouds advancing rapidly from the west. She called for Lily through the kitchen window but received no response. Not worried yet, merely cautious, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked out to the backyard. "Lily, it's starting to cloud over, sweetheart. Time to come back." The silence that answered was unnatural. The empty field stretched before her, flowers swaying gently with the breeze that preceded the storm, with no sign of Lily's yellow dress. By 4:45, Margaret had walked around the entire perimeter of the field, calling with increasing desperation. Robert, alerted by his wife's shouts, joined the search, running to Mr. Wilson's house to ask if the elderly man had seen the girl. The neighbor, confused and alarmed, assured them he hadn't seen Lily that afternoon and immediately offered to help with the search. By 5:15, with fat raindrops beginning to fall and the sky rapidly darkening, Robert was running through the adjacent streets shouting his daughter's name, while Margaret, with a crying Michael in her arms, dialed the police with trembling fingers. "My daughter," "My 5-year-old daughter is missing," her voice broke as she relayed the details to the operator. "She would never disobey. Something's happened to my little girl. Please, come quickly." Sheriff Bill Townsend arrived 20 minutes later, accompanied by 2 deputies, a corpulent man in his 50s, with a graying mustache and eyes that had seen enough to know when a situation was serious. He immediately organized the first systematic searches, despite the rain now falling heavily. In 99% of cases like this, the child is just lost. He tried to reassure the Hendersons as he dispatched his men. "We'll find her before it gets completely dark." But darkness came, and Lily did not. By 10 o'clock, dozens of community volunteers had joined the search, forming a human chain that methodically scoured the field and the small woods beyond, carrying flashlights that created ghostly yellow circles in the rainy night. The Hendersons' living room had been transformed into an improvised command center, with maps spread across the dining table and the telephone ringing constantly. 3 days after the disappearance, when a thorough search of the creek revealed no sign of the girl, Sheriff Townsend called Robert and Margaret for a private conversation in the kitchen. "We need to consider all possibilities," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Do you know anyone who would have any reason to take Lily?" 1 week after Lily's disappearance, as the FBI agents meticulously examined the Henderson house, collecting fingerprints and other traces, an agent found something disturbing hidden in the lining of the toy box in Lily's room, a small bouquet of dried wildflowers tied with a black cord, which no one in the family recognized. The discovery of the mysterious bouquet sent a chill through the Henderson home. Special Agent David Reynolds carefully lifted the small bundle of dried wildflowers from the toy box lining, the black cord stark against the delicate petals. His eyes, sharp beneath a furrowed brow, scanned the room before meeting Margaret's shocked gaze. "Mrs. Henderson, do you recognize this?" he asked, holding up the evidence bag containing the bouquet. "Has Lily ever collected flowers like this before?" Margaret shook her head slowly, her hand instinctively reaching for Robert's. "She collected flowers all the time, but she never tied them with black cord. She used colorful ribbons I gave her from my sewing basket." Special Agent Reynolds nodded, his expression revealing nothing as he labeled the bag. At 40 years old, with military posture and methodical movements, Reynolds had investigated dozens of missing children cases across 3 states. His arrival 3 days earlier had brought both hope and a terrifying reality. The FBI only became involved when a child's disappearance was considered a possible abduction. The next morning, at the makeshift forensic laboratory in Sheriff Townsend's office, a technician hunched over a microscope, examining fibers from the black cord. "This isn't typical household material," he explained, adjusting the focus. "The weave pattern suggests industrial use, possibly from manufacturing or construction." Reynolds took notes while Sheriff Townsend leaned against the wall, his normally authoritative presence diminished by sleepless nights and the weight of a case that threatened to overwhelm his small department. "Any specific industries we should be looking at?" the sheriff asked. "I'll need more tests, but this could narrow our search significantly," the technician replied, not looking up from his work. Back at the Henderson home, the absence of Lily had created fault lines that widened with each passing day. Jason had retreated into a silence that worried his parents as much as Michael's constant questions about his sister. That afternoon, Margaret gently knocked on Jason's bedroom door, hoping to coax him into talking about his feelings. "Jason, sweetheart, can I come in?" The door remained firmly closed. "I'm doing homework," came the muffled reply. Margaret pressed her forehead against the wood, fighting back tears. Through the small gap beneath the door, she could see he'd turned his sister's photograph face down on his desk, baseball posters now covering the wall where pictures of the siblings had once hung. At 11 that night, Robert stood in the kitchen, methodically preparing sandwiches for the boys' lunches the next day. This new routine, taking over household tasks while Margaret spent hours on the phone with investigators, had become his way of maintaining some semblance of normalcy. From the living room, he could hear Margaret's voice, strained with desperation, as she relayed Lily's habits and preferences to yet another FBI agent. Yes, she knows not to talk to strangers. No, she's never wandered off before. Margaret's voice cracked. Please, there must be something else we can do. Robert's eyes drifted to the refrigerator, where Michael's crayon drawings were displayed. Each showed a yellow stick figure beneath a large sun, with Lily written in awkward capital letters. The sight made his throat tighten as he carefully wrapped each sandwich in wax paper. The following morning, Agent Reynolds and Sheriff Townsend walked the perimeter of Mr. Wilson's property, studying the clear sightlines from the elderly man's house to the Henderson backyard and the field where Lily was last seen. From his second-floor window, he would have had a perfect view of anyone approaching from either direction, Reynolds noted, mentally calculating distances and timing. Inside, Mr. Wilson served them tea with shaking hands, thick glasses magnifying watery eyes that darted nervously between the lawmen. I've told you everything I know, he insisted, spilling tea onto the saucer. I was taking my afternoon nap when it happened. I didn't see anything. Reynolds observed the home's interior with practiced scrutiny. While the main floor showed signs of an elderly person's neglect, dusty surfaces and worn furniture, the basement they'd briefly inspected told a different story. Freshly poured concrete flooring and newly painted walls stood in stark contrast to the aging house above. Mr. Wilson, Reynolds asked casually, when did you have your basement renovated? The old man adjusted his glasses. Just some repairs. The spring rains were causing dampness. Later that evening, Margaret found Robert sitting alone on the backyard swing set, gently pushing himself back and forth with one foot. In his hands, he held Lily's small pink watering can, his thumb tracing the flower pattern molded into its plastic surface. Without speaking, Margaret sat beside him on the adjacent swing, the chains creaking softly under her weight. For several minutes, they swayed in silence, watching the sun set over the field where Lily had disappeared. Do you remember how she used to water each flower individually? Robert finally whispered. She'd talk to them like they were her friends. The memory hung between them, Lily running through the field, stopping to carefully examine a purple wildflower, while unknown to them, Mr. Wilson watched from his second-floor window. The next day, Agent Reynolds visited the Millfield Department of Public Works, where he flipped through building permit records for the past 5 years. After an hour of searching, he sat back with a frown. No structural renovation permits for the Wilson residence, he muttered to himself. Billy Matthews, the town's building inspector, overheard Reynolds' comment as he passed by. Wilson bought a lot of concrete and waterproofing paint from the hardware store last month, he volunteered. Said he had basement seepage issues. Never applied for a permit, though. Folks around here often handle small repairs themselves. As federal agents ran background checks on Mr. Wilson, green text scrolling across black computer screens revealed an apparently unblemished life. No criminal record, no suspicious financial transactions. A 30-year career as a high school janitor before retiring to Millfield 15 years ago after his wife's death. That night, Robert and Margaret sat at opposite ends of the living room sofa, their physical distance mirroring the emotional gulf growing between them. Michael's birthday was approaching, and his innocent question had sparked their first argument in days. He asked if Lily will be back for his birthday, Margaret whispered, her voice hollow. What do we tell him, Bob? The truth, Robert replied, then faltered. Or at least, that we don't know. That's not good enough. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. He's 3 years old. He needs something better than we don't know. As investigators prepared a warrant request to more thoroughly examine Mr. Wilson's basement, the telephone rang in the Henderson home at 11:17 that night. Margaret lunged for it, her heart racing. On the other end of the line, there was only silence, followed by a distorted child's voice singing "Happy Birthday," Lily's favorite song that she would sing to her flowers when planting them in the garden. The phone slipped from Margaret's trembling fingers as the distorted melody of "Happy Birthday" ended abruptly. Robert lunged forward, snatching the receiver from the floor and pressing it desperately to his ear, but the line had gone dead. For a moment, neither spoke, the silence in the living room broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. "It was her," Margaret whispered, her face ashen. "Bob." It was Lily's voice. She was trying to communicate with us. Within 20 minutes, the Henderson home buzzed with activity once again as FBI agents traced the mysterious call to a public phone booth in neighboring Oak Ridge, 8 miles from Millfield. By dawn, telephone company technicians had installed recording equipment on the Henderson line, their movements efficient as Margaret watched with red-rimmed eyes, having not slept since the call. "If they call again, we'll capture everything," a technician explained, adjusting dials on a boxy recorder. "Even background noises might give us clues about the caller's location." The following morning, Agent Reynolds stood beside the public telephone on the corner of Main Street in Oak Ridge, watching forensic technicians dust for fingerprints. The small booth, positioned outside a gas station, offered little in the way of evidence. Too many people used it daily for prints to be meaningful. "What about security cameras?" Reynolds asked the station owner, a heavy-set man in oil-stained overalls. "Don't have any," the man replied, shaking his head. "But the pharmacy across the street might." The grainy black and white footage from the pharmacy's single security camera showed only an indistinct figure wearing what appeared to be a hat at 11:12 p.m. The quality was too poor to determine age, gender, or any identifying features, leaving investigators with another frustrating dead end. Later that night in his motel room, Agent Reynolds spread documents about George Wilson across the bed. Personnel files, property records, tax returns, the paper trail of a seemingly ordinary life. Yet there were peculiar gaps. Almost no records existed for Wilson before 1963, when he appeared in Millfield at age 55, recently widowed according to local newspaper announcements. Before that, there was only scattered employment information, suggesting he had moved frequently. Reynolds rubbed his tired eyes, making a note to request deeper background checks through federal databases. Something about Wilson's history felt incomplete, carefully curated. At 3:15 that same night, Robert bolted upright at the sound of Michael's frightened cries. He rushed to his son's bedroom, finding the boy sitting up in bed, pointing a trembling finger toward the window. "The yellow girl was looking at me again, Daddy," Michael sobbed, his small face contorted with fear. "She was right there, watching me." Robert gathered his son into his arms, feeling the boy's heart racing against his chest. "It was just a bad dream, buddy," he murmured, though his own pulse quickened. This wasn't the first time Michael had mentioned seeing the yellow girl outside his window. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face drawn with exhaustion. "I'll stay with him," she offered, taking Michael from Robert's arms. "Can you check outside?" Robert grabbed a flashlight from the hallway drawer and made his way downstairs and out the back door. The night air felt unnaturally still as he swept the beam of light across the yard, revealing nothing but empty shadows and the swing set gently moving in the night breeze. Despite the warm spring air, he shivered. The following afternoon, Sheriff Townsend sat alone in his office after his deputies had gone home. The telephone pressed to his ear. He spoke in hushed tones with a former colleague from Cedar Falls, a town 90 miles north. "Yes, George Wilson lived here around 62, the voice on the other end confirmed. "Quiet man, kept to himself. Left town rather suddenly after the Peterson girl disappeared. Nothing ever came of that case. We assumed she'd run away." "You thinking there's a connection?" Townsend's gaze drifted to the wall map where he'd been marking the towns where Wilson had previously resided, each location accompanied by penciled dates. A pattern was emerging that made his stomach knot. At 7 the next morning, federal and local law enforcement gathered in front of Wilson's house, the elderly man pale and tense as Agent Reynolds presented the search warrant. Wilson's hands trembled violently as he unlocked the basement door, the smell of fresh paint and chemicals immediately noticeable as they descended the stairs. Powerful flashlights illuminated a surprisingly empty space, concrete floors gleaming with newness, walls freshly painted a sterile white. Unlike the cluttered main floor above, the basement contained only a few tools arranged precisely on hooks and a single metal folding chair. Perfect place to clean up evidence, Reynolds muttered to Townsend as technicians began their methodical examination. A black Labrador named Max, trained to detect human remains, circled the basement repeatedly, stopping several times over a specific area of the floor near the north wall. The dog sat, then stood, then circled again, not giving his handler the definitive signal they'd hoped for. "He's interested but not certain," the handler explained, frowning. "Could be trace amounts too small for him to confirm, or chemicals masking the scent." A forensic technician knelt at the junction where the new concrete met the wall, carefully scraping samples from the seam. "If there's any organic material, even microscopic traces, we'll find it," she assured Reynolds, placing the samples in labeled evidence containers. That evening at 6:45, the Henderson family sat around their dining table, the silence broken only by the scrape of forks against plates. Lily's empty chair now held a stack of support letters from the community and strangers touched by news reports about the missing girl. Jason pushed food around his plate, Michael's eyes drooped with exhaustion, and the parents exchanged worried glances across the table. Later, Margaret sat alone in the darkened living room, repeatedly playing the recording of the mysterious call, adjusting the volume to try distinguishing any background sounds. The distorted happy birthday melody played again and again as tears streamed silently down her face. The next morning, preliminary results from the basement samples came back inconclusive. No definitive evidence, but certain chemical compounds suggested thorough cleaning with industrial-grade products not typically used in homes. Before Reynolds could secure a warrant for more invasive testing of the concrete floor, deputies responded to an emergency call from Wilson's next-door neighbor. They found George Wilson unconscious on his kitchen floor, an empty bottle of heart medication on the table beside a handwritten note that simply read, "Forgiveness, but not for what you think." George Wilson survived, but just barely. The doctors at Millfield County Hospital placed him in a medically induced coma to stabilize his condition, while a uniformed officer maintained constant vigil outside his room. The suicide attempt transformed the elderly man from a person of interest into the focus of the investigation, his enigmatic note raising more questions than answers. Agent Reynolds stood by Wilson's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of the frail chest connected to a maze of tubes and monitors. "I want to know the moment he regains consciousness," he instructed the drowsy officer by the door, "even if it's the middle of the night." Back at Wilson's house, now empty and sealed with evidence tape, forensic teams conducted a more invasive search. The mysterious note had been enough to secure additional warrants, allowing investigators to dismantle sections of the basement floor and examine the structure thoroughly. In the dusty attic, accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling, agents discovered cardboard boxes filled with correspondence spanning decades. The yellowed envelopes, meticulously organized by date, revealed that Wilson had maintained regular contact with a younger brother named Edward, who lived in California. "These go back nearly 30 years, Reynolds noted, carefully leafing through the letters. "The brother visited Millfield only once according to these, in May 1978. Sheriff Townsend leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "May 78? That's when Lily disappeared." The letters revealed a strained relationship between the brothers, with frequent references to "our secret" and cryptic mentions of "what we did that summer." The correspondence took on a more urgent tone in the months leading up to Lily's disappearance, with Edward repeatedly expressing his desire to visit Millfield after decades away. While investigators pursued this new lead, the pressure of the unsolved case continued to wear down the Henderson family. 2 weeks after Lily's disappearance, Robert reluctantly returned to his position at First National Bank, financial necessity overriding his desire to devote every waking moment to the search. His first day back, Robert endured sympathetic glances and awkward silences as he moved through the marble-floored lobby toward his office. He overheard a customer whisper to another as he passed, "That's the father of that missing girl," the words striking him like physical blows. At home, Margaret had transformed their spare bedroom into an improvisational search center, with maps covering the walls and phone lines installed so she could coordinate with volunteer searchers. Her obsession with finding Lily consumed her every waking moment, often at the expense of Jason and Michael. "Mom," Michael called from the kitchen one afternoon, his small voice barely carrying over Margaret's intense phone conversation. "Mom, I'm hungry." Margaret waved distractedly, pressing the receiver closer to her ear as she recorded another potential sighting of a blonde girl in a neighboring county. Michael eventually wandered away, finding a package of cookies to quiet his stomach. Jason, now showing signs of serious emotional withdrawal, spent most afternoons alone in his room. One evening, after hearing his parents argue about the search efforts, the 10-year-old furiously tore up a family drawing he'd made, leaving only himself and Michael in the picture. "She only cares about Lily now," he muttered, throwing the torn paper into his trash bin. "It's like me and Michael don't even exist anymore." At 10 minutes past 10 one evening, the Hendersons' phone rang again. Margaret lunged for it, activating the recording equipment with practiced precision. The same distorted child's voice whispered through the line, "Field of flowers, under the flowers," before disconnecting. Sound technicians at the FBI laboratory analyzed the recording for hours, manipulating frequencies and filtering background noise. "It could be an actual child," one technician explained to Reynolds, "or someone using a voice modulator. The quality makes it impossible to determine conclusively." Following the call, Reynolds intensified his investigation into Edward Wilson. Using a public phone to avoid potential leaks to increasingly intrusive journalists, he contacted the director of St. Mary's Psychiatric Institute. "Edward Wilson was a patient here until 3 months ago," the director confirmed. "He was released against medical recommendation after showing improvement with his new medication regimen." The faxed medical report painted a disturbing picture. Patient presence with delusions related to young female figures, frequently mentioning saving children from what he perceives as worldly corruption. Believes certain children possess special qualities that must be preserved. In their makeshift office at the sheriff's station, Townsend and Reynolds examined an old photograph found in Wilson's house. 2 boys standing before a lake, George and Eddie, 1945, written on the back. The younger boy, perhaps 11, stared at the camera with an intensity that seemed inappropriate for a child. Meanwhile, the Henderson family continued to fracture under the strain. At 15 minutes past 5 one afternoon, Margaret sat with Michael in a pediatrician's waiting room, the boy pale and noticeably thinner. The receptionist whispered to her colleague, loud enough for Margaret to hear, "Third missed appointment this month." That night's dinner was particularly tense. Jason refused to answer his father's questions about school. Margaret merely pushed food around her plate without eating, and Lily's empty place setting remained untouched, a painful reminder of their incomplete family. Late that night, Reynolds spread a map of the United States across his motel room bed, marking each location where Edward Wilson had resided over the past 30 years. A pattern emerged: systematic movement every few years, often following reports of missing children that Reynolds had requested from national databases. As investigators prepared an operation to locate and question Edward Wilson in California, where his last known address was an apartment in San Diego, the hospital called with urgent news. George Wilson had regained consciousness. Sheriff Townsend arrived within minutes, notepad ready. The elderly man's eyes fluttered open at the sound of the sheriff entering the room. His voice, barely audible through cracked lips, delivered words that changed the entire direction of the investigation. "It wasn't me. Eddie took her. But I'm the one who brought him here." Sheriff Townsend leaned closer to Wilson's hospital bed, the confession hanging in the air between them. "Tell me about Eddie," he pressed, recorder running. "Tell me everything about your brother and Lily Henderson." The frail man's confession emerged in halting whispers, interrupted by medical alarms and labored breathing. According to George, his younger brother Edward had suffered from delusions since childhood, particularly after their mother's death, when Eddie was just 6 years old. The boy began claiming he could see special light around certain children, those he believed were too pure for this world. Eddie believes he's protecting them, George explained, his voice cracking with effort. He thinks certain special children need to be saved from growing up in what he calls a corrupt world. George admitted allowing Edward to stay at his house during the first week of May, but insisted he hadn't known his brother's intentions until after Lily disappeared. When I confronted him, Eddie said he'd already hidden the girl. He threatened to tell everyone about Blackwater Lake if I went to the police. The mention of Blackwater Lake sent Sheriff Townsend rifling through his notes. It matched a location near one of the towns where the Wilson brothers had lived decades earlier, a town where another child had vanished. Agent Reynolds immediately mobilized FBI field offices in California, issuing an urgent alert. Consider Edward Wilson armed and extremely dangerous. He may have Lily Henderson in his custody. The bulletin included the psychiatric evaluation details and the chilling assessment that Edward believed he was saving children, not harming them. That same afternoon, a painful scene unfolded in the Henderson kitchen. Robert stood holding a funeral home brochure, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief. "We need to give the boys somewhere to say goodbye, Maggie," he said quietly. "It's been 2 weeks with no solid leads. The FBI thinks we should prepare for—" Margaret knocked the brochure violently from his hand, her eyes flashing with rage. "She's not dead," she shouted, voice breaking. "How can you give up so easily? As long as there's even a chance she's alive." "And what about the children who are definitely alive?" Robert countered, his voice rising. "Jason and Michael need us too, but you're so obsessed with finding Lily that you can't see them falling apart right in front of you." Neither noticed Jason at the top of the stairs, silently witnessing the explosion of parental anger. Tears streamed down his face as he retreated to his bedroom, hurriedly stuffing clothes into his school backpack, determined to escape the household that had become unrecognizable in Lily's absence. At 45 minutes past 7 that evening, Robert paced the living room, phone pressed to his ear, as he reported Jason missing to the police. Yes, 10 years old, blue t-shirt and jeans. No, he's never run away before. Margaret sat motionless on the sofa, Michael asleep across her lap, her face a mask of shock. Another child gone, another failure she couldn't process. Police cruisers rolled slowly through Millfield's residential streets, officers sweeping flashlight beams across yards and parks, calling Jason's name. The scene created a terrible déjà vu for neighbors who emerged from their homes to join the search, the community once again mobilizing to find a missing Henderson child. At 30 minutes past 10, an officer radioed headquarters. They'd found Jason huddled in the basement of his friend Billy's house, refusing to emerge from his hiding place behind stacked storage boxes. "They only think about Lily," he sobbed when Robert arrived to collect him. "It's like me and Michael don't even exist anymore. I hate it. I hate all of this." The incident forced the Hendersons to confront the damage their single-minded focus on Lily had inflicted on their family. 3 days later, they sat in the soft beige and green office of Dr. Carol Winters, a family therapist specializing in trauma. Robert and Margaret positioned themselves at opposite ends of the sofa, the physical distance between them mirroring their emotional separation. "What you're experiencing is normal for families in crisis," Dr. Winters explained, her voice gentle but firm. "But Jason and Michael need stability now more than ever. They're experiencing their own grief and trauma, compounded by the loss of parental attention." While the Hendersons began the painful process of addressing their family's fractures, Sheriff Townsend discovered a promising lead. In a rural rental office 20 miles outside Millfield, a property manager confirmed renting a remote cabin to a man matching Edward Wilson's description. "Paid cash for 6 months up front," the manager recalled, showing Townsend the registry. "Said he was a writer, needed isolation to finish his book. Seemed odd, but lots of folks want privacy these days." Investigators pored over topographical maps, locating the cabin in a heavily wooded area, accessible only by a winding dirt road. Meanwhile, forensic teams discovered a crumpled receipt in George Wilson's trash can, listing disturbing purchases: 15 meters of chain, 3 reinforced padlocks, and 20 cans of preserved food, dated 2 weeks before Lily's disappearance. At 40 minutes before midnight, a SWAT team gathered at the base of the mountain, checking weapons and communication equipment in hushed tones. Agent Reynolds studied Edward Wilson's photograph one last time, a thin man with intense eyes and a scholar's posture, before briefing the tactical team on the isolation of the target location and the potential presence of a 5-year-old hostage. As the team began their careful approach under cover of darkness, the telephone rang in the Henderson home miles away. Margaret, who had been sleeping fitfully on the sofa rather than in the bed she still couldn't bear to share with Robert, lunged for the receiver. "Mrs. Henderson," said a clear, calm male voice that sent ice through her veins. "You never should have involved the police. Now we'll have to move," and Lily was so happy here with her flowers. Margaret's hand clutched the receiver so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Let me speak to Lily." The line went dead. Margaret frantically pressed the emergency button on the recording equipment the FBI had installed, then dialed Agent Reynolds' emergency number with shaking fingers. "He called," she gasped when he answered. "Edward Wilson just called our home." The threatening call was immediately reported to the tactical team already approaching the cabin, but it was too late to alter the operation in progress. Reynolds, monitoring from a command vehicle at the mountain's base, ordered the team to proceed with extreme caution. As dawn broke over the mountain, casting long shadows through the pine trees, the SWAT team surrounded the isolated cabin. On the count of 3, they breached the front door with practiced precision, shouts of "FBI" echoing through the forest. Their tactical lights swept across a space that was undeniably inhabited, but completely empty of people. "Clear!" each agent called out in turn, the disappointment palpable in their voices. Agent Reynolds entered the cabin minutes later, touching the back of his hand to the fireplace. "Still warm," he noted grimly. "He left only hours ago. He must have been tipped off somehow." The search team methodically documented the scene, photographing every detail of the hastily abandoned hideout. A half-eaten meal remained on the rough wooden table, alongside a child-sized cup of milk. The discovery sent a wave of hope through the investigation team. Lily had been here, alive, perhaps just hours earlier. On the refrigerator door, held by flower-shaped magnets, hung a child's drawing that made Reynolds' breath catch. The crayon illustration clearly depicted a blonde girl in a yellow dress standing beside a tall, thin man. Behind them stood what appeared to be a red house, next to a blue expanse that could only be water. "Bag this for analysis," Reynolds instructed, carefully removing the drawing, "and get the forensic team to check if these crayon marks are recent." Back at the hospital, George Wilson's health deteriorated rapidly, the strain of his confession and attempted suicide taxing his already weak heart. Still, he provided crucial new information between labored breaths. "Eddie loves lakes," he whispered to Sheriff Townsend. "Ever since we were kids, he had a little boat at Adams Lake, said water was pure, cleansing." His eyes drifted closed, monitors beeping more insistently as nurses rushed in to stabilize him. At the cabin, investigators discovered a crumpled receipt in an outside trash bin, its date from just the previous day. Lakeside Grocery, Pine Harbor, listed children's cereal, milk, and significantly, children's acetaminophen and antibiotics. Reynolds spread a map across the hood of a police cruiser, circling Pine Harbor with a red marker. "It's a vacation community 60 miles north of here," he explained to the assembled agents. "Known for isolated lakeside cottages, perfect for someone wanting privacy." At 12:30 that afternoon, the Henderson home buzzed with tension as Robert packed suitcases, his movements brusque with suppressed anger. "You're going to your sister's today," he told Margaret, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's not negotiable. He called our home, which means he knows where we live." Margaret blocked the doorway to Michael's room, her jaw set in defiance. "I won't abandon the search now that we're so close," she shot back. "He called our house, Bob. He's watching, waiting for us to give up." Their voices rose, neither willing to yield, until Jason appeared in the hallway. His face, normally so childlike, looked years older as he stepped between his warring parents. "Please stop fighting," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "We have to find Lily. We can't find her if you're fighting all the time." The simple plea cut through their anger, leaving both parents staring at their son in shocked silence. In that moment, they truly saw what their conflict had done to Jason. The dark circles under his eyes, the slumped shoulders bearing a weight no child should carry. Later that evening, the Henderson family sat together in their living room with Agent Reynolds and an FBI negotiator, reviewing the recorded phone call. "He wants you to know he still has Lily," the negotiator explained. "That could be good or bad. It means she's alive, but he's also establishing contact, which indicates he has some agenda." Technicians installed more sophisticated tracking equipment on the Henderson phone line, carefully explaining how to keep Edward talking if he called again. "Every second matters," one technician emphasized. "The longer the connection, the better chance we have of pinpointing his location." As twilight descended, a caravan of official and unmarked vehicles departed for Pine Harbor. In the lead car, Reynolds studied aerial photographs of the lake region, with its dozens of isolated cabins and cottages dotting the shoreline and small wooded islands. "There are over 200 structures in this area," he noted to Sheriff Townsend, who drove with grim determination. "If he's here, we need to narrow it down fast before he moves her again." At Millfield County Hospital, nurses rushed into George Wilson's room as alarms blared from his monitors. Despite their efforts, the elderly man suffered a massive cardiac arrest. In his final moments of consciousness, he scrawled a message on a scrap of paper that a nurse later delivered to the investigators. "Red Cottage, small island. Look for stone chimney." George Wilson's final message sent a wave of renewed urgency through the investigation. Within hours, the Pine Harbor Sheriff's Department had converted their small meeting room into a command center with detailed maps of Lake Adams covering every available wall space. Red pins marked each island large enough to support a structure, while investigators methodically identified every cottage with a stone chimney. "There are 17 islands on Lake Adams," Reynolds explained to the assembled team, circling 3 locations with a red marker. "Based on aerial surveys, only 7 have structures on them, and only 3 of those have stone chimneys visible from the air." The FBI brought in a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging technology, carefully disguised as a tourism survey aircraft to avoid alerting Edward Wilson. At dawn, the helicopter made its first pass over the lake, its sophisticated camera capturing heat signatures that might indicate occupied buildings. "We've got 3 active heat sources," the operator reported, manipulating the controls to sharpen the images on his screen, all showing fireplace or heating system signatures on separate islands. The tactical approach required extreme discretion. Any obvious police presence might trigger Edward to flee with Lily, or worse, take more desperate measures if he felt cornered. Teams of agents disguised as recreational fishermen began casual approaches to the first island, where a blue cottage with a stone chimney was visible through the trees. "Just passing by, beautiful place you've got," one agent called to an elderly couple tending a garden outside the cottage. The brief conversation confirmed they were simply vacationers, eliminating the first potential location. Back at the temporary safe house where the Hendersons had been relocated, Reynolds was briefing the family on strategies should Edward call again. Margaret sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped so tightly her fingernails left marks on her palms. "Keep him talking as long as possible," Reynolds emphasized. "Ask about Lily's well-being, but don't antagonize him. The more time he spends on the line, the better chance we have of tracing the call." At 11:45 that morning, the telephone rang in the safe house. Margaret answered with trembling hands, pressing the record button with practiced precision. "Edward?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "How is Lily? Can we talk about what you want?" In the surveillance van parked nearby, technicians worked frantically to trace the call, signaling Margaret through the window to keep the conversation going. The voice on the other end was unnervingly calm and articulate, Not the raving madman the Hendersons had imagined, but something perhaps more disturbing. A man completely convinced of his own twisted logic. "Lily is happy here," Edward explained, his tone reasonable and measured. "She has her own garden of special flowers. Children like her shouldn't grow up in this corrupt world. They should be preserved, kept pure." Margaret's eyes filled with tears when Edward briefly allowed Lily to speak. "Hi, Mommy," came the small voice, confirming what the investigation team had desperately hoped. Lily Henderson was still alive after more than 7 months of captivity. In the technical support vehicle, an audio specialist isolated background sounds from the call, water lapping against wood, a distant motorboat, and most significantly, a distinctive buoy bell that rangers confirmed was located in the northern section of the lake. "We're narrowing it down," a technician reported as the triangulation equipment processed the signal. "He's definitely on the lake, northeastern quadrant, likely one of these 3 islands." The map was quickly updated, a red circle now focused on a small cluster of islands in the northeastern section of Lake Adams. The second reconnaissance team, approaching the island with the red cottage, reported seeing a tall male figure moving near an improvised garden at the back of the structure. "Subject matches Edward Wilson's description," came the hushed report over secure radio, "and there appears to be a small figure in yellow moving inside the cottage." Dark clouds formed rapidly over the lake as the tactical team finalized their approach plan. A local meteorologist who had been brought into the command center pointed at radar images on his tablet. "Severe storm approaching from the northeast," he warned. "You've got about 2 hours before we're looking at waves up to 6 feet and dangerous lightning." Reynolds and the SWAT commander reviewed typical structural layouts of the area's cottages, planning entry points while watching the weather deteriorate visibly through the command center windows. The tactical team would need to approach by water, as the island had no helipad, making the incoming storm a critical factor in their timing. "We go now," Reynolds decided, studying the increasingly dark sky. "We can't risk losing him in this weather, and we can't risk Lily's safety if the cottage is damaged in the storm." Within 30 minutes, the first tactical team launched their boats, moving slowly to avoid creating wake that might alert Edward. Their black watercraft blended with the darkening waters as the storm front approached, providing additional cover for their approach. Through high-powered binoculars, the team leader observed the red cottage, noting its stone chimney and recently added security features, motion sensor lights, and what appeared to be newly installed window locks. They were only 200 meters from the island's shoreline when nature intervened dramatically. A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the sky, momentarily bathing the entire scene in harsh white light. In that instant, the team leader clearly saw Edward Wilson's face at the window, his expression changing from curiosity to alarm as he spotted the approaching boats. Seconds later, they heard the distinctive sound of a generator starting up, followed by the mechanical whir of metal security shutters descending over every window and door of the red cottage. The security shutters descended with a deafening mechanical screech, transforming the quaint red cottage into an impenetrable fortress within seconds. Agent Reynolds watched through binoculars as the last sliver of window disappeared behind metal plates, his jaw tightening. "Pull back, maintain visual but retreat to safe distance," he ordered through his radio. The tactical boats reversed course, fighting increasingly violent waves as the storm intensified around them. Rain began to pour in sheets, visibility dropping to mere yards as lightning forked across the blackening sky. The lake, previously calm enough for the stealthy approach, now churned with whitecaps that threatened to capsize the smaller vessels in the FBI flotilla. "This is Agent Reynolds, to all units. We have a confirmed hostage situation. Subject has secured the location and is aware of our presence. Switch to Protocol Sierra." Protocol Sierra, the FBI's standard operating procedure for high-risk hostage situations involving children, meant containing the scene while negotiation experts took the lead. Unfortunately, the weather made establishing a proper perimeter nearly impossible. With waves now reaching 4 feet and climbing, the tactical team could only secure the water approaches to the island, while the storm prevented any air support. At the makeshift command center, communications specialist Tanya Reeves adjusted her headset, attempting to establish contact with the cottage. "Edward Wilson, this is the FBI," she called through a satellite-connected loudspeaker system directed at the island. "We want to ensure everyone's safety. Please respond on the emergency channel." For nearly 20 minutes, only the howl of wind and crash of thunder answered her repeated attempts. Then, cutting through the storm's cacophony, Edward's voice emerged from the external speaker system he had installed on the cottage's exterior. "You don't understand what you're doing," his voice rang out, distorted by the weather but clearly audible. "I'm protecting her. She doesn't belong in your corrupt world. She's special. She sees things others can't." In the safe house miles away, the Hendersons huddled together on the sofa, Jason and Michael finally asleep after hours of anxiety. Robert held Margaret's hand, their first genuine physical connection in months, as they stared at the silent telephone. "I should have checked on her earlier that day," Robert whispered, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I heard the back door close. I could have looked up from my newspaper, gone to the window, seen which way she went." Margaret squeezed his hand, her own tears falling freely. "And I should have said no when she asked to pick flowers. We both knew a storm was coming." She took a shuddering breath. "We can't keep doing this to ourselves, Bob, or to the boys." The weight of 7 months of recrimination, blame, and guilt hung between them, but for the first time, neither pulled away from its crushing pressure. Instead, they leaned into it together, finding unexpected strength in their shared burden. Back at the command center, investigators opened a file that had just arrived from FBI headquarters. A police report from 1953 describing the drowning of a 7-year-old girl named Marianne Collins. The black and white photograph showed a 15-year-old George Wilson being escorted by police, his face a mask of terror and confusion. More disturbing were the pages from Edward's childhood diary found among George's possessions. "George said he'll protect me. He told the police he was the one who took Marianne swimming, not me. He said they wouldn't believe it was an accident if they knew I was there because of what happened last summer with the neighbor's cat." At 9:30 that night, with the storm reaching its peak intensity, Edward's voice came through the communication system again, now tinged with desperation. "I want immunity and safe passage to South America. I have passports ready for myself and Lily." The negotiator maintained a calm, steady dialogue, buying time as technical specialists studied blueprints of the cottage. "The security shutter system is electric," an engineer explained, examining the structural plans under emergency lighting. "If the generator fails, they remain closed by default, but the manual release mechanism is located on the exterior of each window." Thermal imaging monitors showed 2 distinct heat signatures moving inside the cottage, one large figure pacing on the 2nd floor, and a smaller one sitting relatively still in what appeared to be a bedroom. As midnight approached, the cottage lights flickered during a particularly violent thunderclap, followed by the sound of the generator sputtering momentarily before resuming operation. The technical team noted this vulnerability immediately. "The generator is straining," their leader reported. "These systems aren't designed for extended operation in these conditions. If the main power stays out and the generator fails, he loses his electronic security systems." The storm continued to rage throughout the night, tactical teams rotating shifts as they maintained their positions despite the punishing conditions. In the pre-dawn hours, the weather finally began to subside, the violent thunderstorms gradually yielding to a steady, soaking rain. At the safe house, at 17 minutes past 3 in the morning, the telephone rang once before the line went dead. Margaret lunged for it, her heart racing. When it rang again seconds later, she snatched up the receiver, expecting Edward's now familiar voice. Instead, she heard something that made her blood freeze and her hope soar simultaneously, a clear, frightened child's voice. "Mommy, the tall man is sleeping now. I'm in the boat closet with his radio, and it's really dark in here." "Lily?" Margaret's voice trembled as she clutched the phone. "Sweetheart, is that really you?" "Yes, Mommy," came the whispered reply. "I want to come home." The command center erupted into action as Margaret relayed the unexpected development. Agent Reynolds immediately contacted the tactical team surrounding the island, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Operation status has changed. The child is awake and communicating. The subject is reportedly asleep. This is our window. Margaret kept Lily on the line, following the negotiators' hastily scribbled instructions. Lily, can you tell me exactly where you are in the house? Not in the main house, Lily whispered. In the boathouse. He has a special radio here that he talks to people on. I'm hiding in the closet where he keeps the fishing stuff. This revelation electrified the rescue team. The boathouse hadn't been visible from their surveillance positions and wasn't included in the original structural plans. More importantly, Lily's description suggested it might not be protected by the same security system as the main cottage. Ask her if she can see any windows or doors from where she is, Reynolds instructed Margaret. Keeping her voice calm despite her racing heart, Margaret relayed the question. Lily's response came after a brief pause. There's a door that goes to the water. It has a big lock, but not the metal things that came down on the windows in the big house. The tactical team leader immediately adjusted their approach plan, directing a small 4-person unit to circle around to the lake-facing side of the island. With the storm diminishing and dawn approaching, they would have limited darkness remaining for cover. Margaret continued engaging Lily, each question carefully designed both to comfort her daughter and to extract critical tactical information. Tell me about your day yesterday, sweetheart. What did you do? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. I worked in my garden, Lily replied. He lets me grow flowers, blue ones and yellow ones, and I can see the whole lake from there. There are boats sometimes. As Lily spoke, the negotiator nodded encouragingly to Margaret. The conversation was providing crucial details about the property layout and Lily's routine, all while maintaining the child's calm. The rescue team moved silently through the now calmer waters, approaching the island from the opposite side of their initial attempt. Through night vision equipment, they identified a small wooden structure extending partially over the water, the boathouse Lily had described. Visual confirmation on boathouse structure, the team leader whispered into his radio. Single door facing water, padlocked, no visible alarm system, preparing for approach. At the safe house, Robert gripped Margaret's free hand as she continued speaking softly to Lily, tears streaming silently down both their faces. This was the first time they'd heard their daughter's voice in over 7 months, a voice that somehow sounded both familiar and different, older in ways that broke their hearts. The tactical team reached the wooden dock extending from the boathouse, their movements deliberate and nearly soundless as they positioned themselves on either side of the padlocked door. The lock would need to be cut, an action that would inevitably make noise that might wake Edward. At 5 in the morning, with the sky beginning to lighten almost imperceptibly in the east, Margaret's carefully maintained composure shattered as Lily whispered urgently, I hear something. I think he's moving around upstairs. Execute now, Reynolds commanded instantly. Repeat, execute now. The tactical team's response was immediate and precisely coordinated. As 2 agents cut through the padlock on the boathouse door, others simultaneously breached entry points on the main cottage. The security shutters, still down but no longer electronically monitored due to fluctuating generator power, were pried open at vulnerable connection points identified by the technical team. Inside the main cottage, Edward Wilson was halfway down the stairs between floors when agents stormed through 3 separate entry points. Still groggy from sleep and completely surprised by the multi-point breach, he had no opportunity to resist as he was quickly immobilized and secured. Subject in custody, came the crisp report over the radio network. In the boathouse, Agent Lisa Morales, specially trained in child trauma recovery, located Lily exactly where she had described, huddled behind fishing equipment in a small storage closet. The girl clutched a tiny bouquet of wildflowers tied with a piece of string, her eyes wide with fear and hope. Hi, Lily, Agent Morales said softly, kneeling at a non-threatening distance. My name is Lisa. I'm here with the people who've been helping your mom and dad find you. You're safe now." At 40 minutes past 5, medical personnel conducted the first assessment of Lily on a secure area of the island. Despite being noticeably underweight and pale from months without adequate sunlight, her vital signs were stable. The small wildflower bouquet remained firmly grasped in her hand, a detail noted by the child psychologist in attendance. Edward Wilson, now handcuffed and being loaded onto a separate police boat, showed no resistance. His expression remained eerily serene, almost detached, as he repeatedly murmured, "She was too special. You don't understand." As dawn finally broke fully across Lake Adams, a medical evacuation helicopter landed in a clearing on the mainland shore. Lily, wrapped in thermal blankets and accompanied by Agent Morales and a pediatric trauma specialist, was carefully escorted aboard. While the helicopter lifted off with Lily safely on board, Agent Reynolds received an alarming call from the forensic team conducting a preliminary examination of the cottage. "Sir, you need to see this immediately." The team leader's voice was tense. "We found a locked room in the basement containing evidence, small shoes, clothing items, and journals with dates suggesting Lily wasn't the first child kept here, but possibly the only survivor of a series of abductions dating back decades." The discovery in Edward Wilson's basement sent shockwaves through the investigation team. 7 pairs of small shoes, meticulously arranged by size and age, told a story more horrific than anyone had anticipated. Detective Reynolds stood silently among the evidence, his weathered face grim as technicians cataloged each item: clothing, toys, and most disturbing of all, journals documenting Edward's twisted philosophy about saving special children from the world's corruption. At Millfield Children's Hospital, the Hendersons waited anxiously outside a treatment room where medical staff conducted comprehensive evaluations of their daughter. When the pediatrician finally emerged, her expression was cautiously optimistic. "Physically, Lily is malnourished, but not severely so," she explained, leading them to a quiet consultation room. "She has vitamin deficiencies consistent with limited sunlight exposure and some muscle weakness from restricted movement, but there are no signs of physical abuse." The psychological assessment, however, revealed more complex challenges. Dr. Bennett, the hospital's leading child psychiatrist, spoke gently but frankly to the parents. "Lily exhibits signs of what we call captivity adaptation syndrome," he explained. "She's formed certain attachments to her captor as a survival mechanism. She may ask about returning to her garden or mention Edward in ways that might be disturbing to hear." Margaret and Robert nodded, hands clasped tightly together, as the doctor continued outlining the path forward: regular therapy, gradual reintegration to family life, patience with behavioral regressions that might occur. When they were finally allowed into Lily's room, the emotional impact nearly overwhelmed them. Their daughter sat cross-legged on the hospital bed, drawing flowers with crayons provided by the staff. She looked up slowly as the door opened, her blue eyes, so like Robert's, widening with recognition. "Mommy? Daddy?" Her voice sounded smaller than they remembered, hesitant in a way the formerly outgoing child had never been. Margaret moved forward carefully, kneeling beside the bed at eye level with Lily. "Yes, sweetheart, we're here." The cautious embrace that followed felt both achingly familiar and heartbreakingly different. Lily's body initially tensed before gradually relaxing into her mother's arms. Robert joined them, tears flowing freely down his face as he gently stroked his daughter's hair, now several inches longer than in the photographs that had covered missing posters across 3 states. "We missed you so much, Lilypad," he whispered, using the nickname that suddenly seemed to belong to a different lifetime. The following day, Jason and Michael were brought to see their sister, a reunion carefully structured and supervised by Dr. Bennett. Michael, too young to fully comprehend the situation, ran impulsively toward Lily, causing her to startle visibly before offering a tentative smile. Jason hung back, conflicted emotions playing across his face: joy at seeing his sister, anger at how her absence had torn apart their family, and uncertainty about what her return meant. That afternoon, hospital staff witnessed the first of many challenges when a nurse inadvertently closed Lily's door completely while checking vitals. The child's reaction was immediate and severe, screaming about being locked away, curling into a protective ball, inconsolable until the door was propped wide open and she could see the hallway beyond. In a hospital conference room, a multidisciplinary team met with the Hendersons to discuss Lily's transition home. Terms like post-traumatic stress, reintegration therapy, and environmental triggers filled the air as Margaret and Robert took detailed notes, determined to create the healing space their daughter needed. Meanwhile, the investigation at the island cottage continued to uncover Edward Wilson's methodical depravity. Agent Reynolds stood in the basement room, now fully documented by crime scene technicians, staring at a timeline that connected Wilson to at least 7 other child disappearances dating back to 1964. He kept souvenirs from each victim, the lead forensic investigator explained, pointing to carefully preserved items in evidence bags. The journals suggest he believed he was preserving their innocence by preventing them from growing up. In the interrogation room at the federal building, Edward Wilson maintained his disturbing calm, his reality completely divorced from normal human understanding. "I saved them from corruption," he stated matter-of-factly to investigators. Lily was special. She understood the flowers, how they need protection. 1 week after her rescue, Lily spent her first night back in the Henderson home. Every room was equipped with nightlights at her insistence, and Margaret slept on the floor beside her daughter's bed, ready to comfort her through the inevitable nightmares. Outside, Robert worked through his own emotions by dismantling the white fence that had separated their property from what had been Mr. Wilson's field, now abandoned and overgrown. Each board he removed felt like reclaiming territory from the nightmare that had consumed their lives. Family therapy became the cornerstone of their new routine. During one particularly significant session, the therapist asked each family member to draw their version of home. As the therapist noted in her records, Lily's drawing featured a house with multiple windows and conspicuously no locks on any doors. 1 month after the rescue, the Hendersons experienced a breakthrough moment during dinner. Jason made a silly joke about his mashed potatoes resembling Mount Rushmore, and Lily laughed, a genuine, spontaneous sound that momentarily startled everyone before relieved smiles spread around the table. It was the first time they'd heard her laugh since her return. On a sunny Saturday, almost exactly 1 year after Lily's rescue, the Henderson family gathered in their backyard, planting a garden of wildflowers together. As Lily patiently taught Michael the names of different species, Margaret and Robert watched from a short distance away, their hands intertwined. In the afternoon of the following spring, almost exactly 12 months after Lily's rescue, the Henderson family attended the final hearing of Edward Wilson's trial. The sentence of multiple life imprisonments brought a sense of formal closure, though they all knew some healing journeys had only just begun. Returning home, they found the wildflower garden in full bloom, a vivid symbol of resilience. Lily, now almost 7 and preparing to return to school full-time, knelt to examine a particularly vibrant blue flower. "This one's my favorite now," she said with a serenity that surprised her parents. "Because it survived the winter."